The night was quiet on Earl McCaffrey's farm in rural Texas, and the old Marine sat on his porch with a cold beer in his hand, watching the stars like he did every evening since his second wife left him. 3 years ago, he was 42 years old, with gray in his beard and scars on his body that told stories he never shared with anyone. And he liked his life simple now. Just him, his dogs, and 17 firearms locked in a safe that he cleaned every Sunday after church. The lights appeared without warning. 3 bright circles descending from the sky faster than any aircraft Earl had ever seen. And his first thought was that the government was testing something new. But his second thought died in his throat when the beam hit him. Everything went white, and then everything went black when Earl opened his eyes. He was not on his porch anymore. He lay on a cold metal floor in a room with no windows and walls that glowed with a pale blue light. And the air smelled wrong, like chemicals and something else he could not name. Something alien in the truest sense of the word. Earl sat up slowly and checked himself for injuries, finding none. Then stood and examined his prison with the careful eyes of a man who had escaped captivity 3 times in 3 different wars. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a single door that had no handle and a small vent near the ceiling. And Earl filed away every detail in his mind, like he was making a map. Then the door opened and Earl saw his captors for the first time. Stood 7 feet tall with bodies like insects, hard shells covering their chests and arms, and their heads were long with huge black eyes that reflected Earl's face back at him. And they had mandibles that clicked when they made sounds. There were 3 of them. And they carried weapons that looked like rifles, but sleeker, more advanced than anything on Earth. Earl stared at them for a long moment. And then he said the only thing that came to mind, "Well, ain't this some bullshit?" The aliens made clicking sounds to each other, and a device on one of their chests spoke in broken English. The specimen is awake and making panic vocalizations. This is normal for prey species. Earl raised an eyebrow at that. Panic vocalizations, he repeated. And then he laughed, a short hard sound that made all 3 aliens take a step back. "Son, I fought in places you can't pronounce. I've been shot twice, stabbed once, and my ex-wife threw a cast iron skillet at my head. And you think I'm panicking?" The aliens conferred with each other in their clicking language. And then the one with the translator spoke again. "The specimen will cooperate with examination procedures. Resistance is not advised. Is that right?" Earl said. And he crossed his arms over his chest and planted his feet. "And what happens if I don't cooperate?" The lead alien raised its weapon and pointed it at Earl's chest. "Pain compliance will be administered." Earl had been threatened by better than space bugs, and he knew when to pick his battles, so he uncrossed his arms and let his shoulders drop, playing the part of a beaten man while his eyes memorized everything, the way the aliens moved, the placement of the weapons, the slight hesitation in the one on the left. "All right," he said, keeping his voice low and defeated. "All right, I'll cooperate." The aliens seemed satisfied, their mandibles clicking in what Earl guessed was approval. And they led him down a corridor that curved like the inside of a cello, counted his steps, and noted every door, every junction, every place where a man might hide or fight or run. And he saw other cells like his with other creatures inside, things with too many eyes, things with fur and horns, things that cowered when the insect aliens walked past. They were all prisoners, Earl realized. And they were all afraid the aliens took Earl to a larger room filled with equipment he did not understand. Machines that hummed and glowed and made his teeth ache. And they strapped him to a table and began their examination. They took blood and tissue samples. They scanned his body with lights that felt warm and wrong. And they clicked at each other the whole time, making notes on devices that floated in the air beside them. One of them leaned close to Earl's face and spoke through the translator. "You are from the planetary body designated Earth, correct?" I'm from Texas, Earl said. That's in America. And in America, we don't take kindly to being kidnapped by bugs. The alien did not seem to understand the distinction. Texas, America, Earth, these are your regional designations. Your species is classified as human, correct? That's right. Humans are cataloged as a Category 3 species, the alien continued. Soft tissue organisms with limited natural weapons, dependent on external tools. Easily domesticated according to preliminary surveys. Earl felt a cold anger building in his chest. The same anger that had kept him alive in a prison camp when everyone else had given up. The same anger that had driven him through jungles and deserts and frozen mountains when his body wanted to quit. Easily domesticated. He repeated softly, yes. Humans display strong herd instincts and submission responses when confronted with superior force. This makes them ideal candidates for labor acquisition. Earl smiled then. And it was not a nice smile. It was the smile he had worn when he walked out of that prison camp with enemy blood on his hands, and fire at his back. The aliens noticed the expression and made confused clicking sounds. Specimen is displaying an unusual facial configuration. Possibly a stress response. That ain't stress, Earl said quietly. That's a promise. They returned him to his cell after the examination, confident that their new specimen was properly cowed. And they did not see. Earl immediately began testing every surface for weaknesses. They did not see him palm a small piece of metal that had fallen from one of their machines. They did not hear him whisper to himself in the dark. Making plans and counting guards and waiting for his moment, the Velthari Dominion had conquered 37 worlds and enslaved hundreds of species. And they had never met anything they could not break, but they had never captured an American. Before, and Earl McCaffrey had no intention of being anyone's slave. He sat in the blue glow of his cell, and he smiled at the camera watching him. And somewhere on the ship, a Velthari analyst noted the expression in her report. Specimen continues to display unusual stress responses. Further observation recommended. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. 3 days passed on the Velthari scout vessel Silent Grasp, and Earl McCaffrey learned more about his captors with every hour. He learned that they were called the Velthari, an insectoid species that had built an empire across dozens of star systems. And he learned that they saw other species the way humans saw cattle, useful, manageable, and ultimately disposable. He also learned that they had no idea what they were dealing with. The Velthari science cast came to his cell every morning to run tests, and Earl cooperated just enough to keep them comfortable while he gathered information like a man hoarding ammunition. He watched how they walked and noticed they favored their right sides. He listened to their clicking language and started to pick out patterns, words that repeated, sounds that meant danger or food or movie. Studied their weapons and saw that they had a slight delay between pulling the trigger and firing. Maybe half a second, enough time for a fast man to move, and Earl was a fast man when he needed to bait Velthari. Psychologists were confused by their human specimen, and Subarchon Vrexel read their reports with growing concern in her private quarters. The creature shows no submission responses, the lead scientist reported through her communication device. When we threaten it, its heart rate decreases rather than increases. When we show it images of Velthari warriors, it makes a sound our translators identify as laughter. Laughter is a fear response in many species. Vrexel said, we considered that. Subarchon, but the human's other physiological markers do not support fear. It appears to genuinely find our warriors amusing. Vrexel clicked her mandibles in frustration. What about isolation and food deprivation? Those methods break most species within 2 rotations. We tried that approach, the scientist admitted. The human responded by exercising vigorously in its cell and making loud vocalizations that our translation software identifies as military training chants from its region of origin. It was singing? Shouting would be more accurate, Subarchon. For 6 hours straight, Rexel pulled up the Dominion's database on humans and read the entry again. Fragile, non-aggressive, herd-dependent, easily domesticated. And she wondered if perhaps their advanced scouts had made an error. She began researching the specific region where this human had been captured. A place called Texas within a larger territory called America. And what she found made her increasingly uneasy. The Americans had fought a war against their own rulers over something called taxation. They had a document that declared all individuals had the right to weapons. Their historical communications were filled with phrases that the translator struggled to process. Live free or die, and don't tread on me, and from my cold dead hands. These did not sound like the words of an easily domesticated species. Meanwhile, Earl was making friends. The cell next to his held a creature that looked like a cross between a deer and a human, with gentle eyes and delicate hands. And it spoke through the wall in a soft voice that Earl's translator picked up as female. You should stop resisting, she said. The Velthari always win. Fighting only brings more pain. What's your name? Earl asked. I am Yeleth of the Ilthrani. We are scholars, and we surrendered to the Dominion 3 generations ago. Resistance is illogical when defeat is certain. Well, Yeleth, Earl said, where I come from, we got a saying, it ain't over till it's over. I do not understand. It means nothing is certain, especially defeat. My people have won fights. We had no business winning because we were too stubborn to know we were beat. There was silence from the other cell for a long moment. You truly believe you can escape? I don't believe it, Earl said. I know it, and when I do, I'm taking all of you with me. Yeleth made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. You were kind to offer hope. Human, but the Velthari have conquered hundreds of worlds. One soft creature cannot defeat an empire. Soft, Earl repeated. And he thought about the piece of metal he had been sharpening against the floor for 3 days. Now thin and sharp as a razor. People keep calling me that. He spent the next week pretending to break. He stopped exercising. He stopped singing. He sat in the corner of his cell and stared at nothing. And the Velthari scientists noted with satisfaction that their methods were finally working. The human has entered a depressive state, they reported. This is consistent with other prey species. Once hope is removed, compliance follows. What they did not see was Earl mapping the ship in his head. What they did not notice was Earl teaching himself to read Velthari script by comparing the labels on the equipment they brought to his cell. What they did not understand was that the emptiness in Earl's eyes was not defeat. It was focus. He asked for permission to pray 3 times a day, claiming it was a religious requirement. And the Velthari allowed it because their database said humans were superstitious, creatures who became docile when their rituals were permitted. Each prayer session was actually a scouting mission. Earl knelt facing different directions each time, counting guards, memorizing patrol patterns, noting which doors were locked and which were not. On the 10th day, he asked a guard a question in broken Velthari, having practiced the words in the dark of his cell. How many crew on ship? The guard was so surprised that a human had learned to speak that it answered without thinking, 47 warriors and 12 support cast. Earl nodded slowly. 47, he said in English. And then he smiled again. That same dangerous smile that the Velthari kept mistaking for stress. Of Archon Vrexil saw the interaction on a security monitor and felt something she had not felt in decades of military service. She felt afraid. She requested additional security from high command. explaining that the human specimen was displaying unusual intelligence and adaptability, warning that their initial assessments may have been incorrect. High Command denied her request. "One human cannot threaten a military vessel," came the reply. "Your concern is noted and dismissed as excessive caution. Focus on completing your mission." Rexel stared at the message for a long time, and then she looked at the security feed showing the human sitting peacefully in his cell. And she made a decision she would watch this creature herself. She would learn what made it different, and perhaps, if she was lucky, she would understand before it was too late. But deep down, in a place she would not acknowledge, Rexel already knew they had made a terrible mistake, and the human called Earl was going to make them pay for it. Earl made his move on the 15th night. He had learned that the Veltari operated on a 20-hour cycle, and their guards were weakest during the transition between shifts. When tired warriors handed off duties to fresh ones and attention wandered, he waited until the corridor lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. And then he used the sharpened metal to pry open the maintenance panel beside his cell door. A panel the Veltari had not bothered to secure, because what captive would know how to access their systems? But Earl had been watching, and Earl had been learning. And Earl knew exactly which wire to cut the door slid open without a sound. He moved through the corridor like a ghost, keeping to the shadows. And he stopped at Yila's cell first. "Time to go," he whispered through the door. "Human. Earl, what are you doing?" "I'm getting us out. Can you walk quietly?" Yes, but this is madness. They will catch us and they're gonna try," Earl said as he worked on her door panel. "Now hush up and stay behind me." He freed Yilith and then moved to the next cell, where a massive creature with gray scales and 4 arms sat in chains. "What species are you?" Earl asked. "I am Tarek of the Korath," the creature rumbled. "We were warriors once, before the Veltari broke us." "You still look like a warrior to me," Earl said. "You want to fight again, or you want to stay in that cage?" Something sparked in Tarek's 4 eyes, something that had been dead for a long time. "I will fight." Earl freed him and moved on, gathering prisoners as he went. The small furry Finari who had been taken as food livestock, the aquatic sylph who could barely breathe in the dry ship air, and a dozen others who had given up hope until this strange human appeared at their doors with fire in his eyes. "Listen to me," Earl said to the group huddled in the darkness of an empty storage bay. "I ain't gonna lie to you. This is gonna be hard, and some of us might not make it. But I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And I'm guessing most of you feel the same way." "We have no weapons," Torek said. "The Veltari took everything." Earl smiled and held up a maintenance tool he had stolen from a supply closet. "Then we make weapons. That's what humans do. We take what we got and we make it work. Over the next 3 hours. The prisoners turned that storage bay into an armory. Earl showed them how to fashion clubs from metal pipes, how to sharpen edges on floor grating, how to make tripwires from electrical cable. And the other species watched in amazement as this soft creature from Earth turned their prison into a death trap. "Your people do this often?" Yeleth asked as Earl fashioned a sling from torn fabric. "My people invented a weapon called the gun," Earl said. "Before that we threw rocks, before that we used pointy sticks, and before that we use our bare hands and teeth. We've been making weapons since before we could walk upright. It's kind of our thing." The first attack came at shift change. Earl had positioned his people at key points throughout the lower decks. And when the Veltari guards walked into the ambush, they never knew what hit them. Torak grabbed one guard and slammed it into the wall with all 4 arms. While the Fanari, those small creatures the Veltari had dismissed as food, swarmed another guard with their razor-sharp claws. Earl himself took down the 3rd guard with a length of pipe across the back of its head, and he felt no guilt about it. These things had captured him and planned to enslave his entire species. And Earl had never believed in showing mercy to slavers. take their weapons, he ordered, and strip them of anything useful, communicators, key cards, anything. The prisoners armed themselves with Velthury rifles, and Earl showed them the delay he had noticed. That half second between trigger pull and discharge. Don't aim where they are, he said. Aim where they're gonna be. The next 3 hours were chaos. Earl led his growing army through the lower decks, striking fast and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. And he used every trick he had learned in 30 years of military service. He disabled sensors by smashing them with a fire extinguisher, contaminated the ship's water supply with cleaning chemicals from a maintenance closet. He scratched symbols into walls at random intersections. And when the Velthury asked prisoners what they meant, the prisoners said they were summoning rituals. They were actually football plays, Earl remembered from high school, but the Velthury did not know that. And fear spread through the crew like a virus. Archon Vrexel finally convinced High Command to take the threat seriously. The human has freed the prisoners and is leading them in coordinated attacks, she reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. We have lost 11 warriors in the past 3 hours. Request immediate reinforcement. 11 warriors lost to escaped livestock? High Command responded with disbelief. This is not livestock, Vrexel said. This is something else entirely. High Command authorized a kill team, 6 of the best warriors on the ship, with orders to eliminate the human specimen at any cost. They found Earl in the lower cargo bay, alone, apparently waiting for them. There he is, the team leader clicked. Surrounded and helpless, just as the database predicted. Earl stood in the center of the bay with his hands at his sides, and he watched the 6 warriors fan out around him with their weapons raised. You know what y'all's problem is? Earl said conversationally. You read too many books and don't pay enough attention to what's right in front of you. The team leader's mandibles clicked in confusion. What do you mean, human? Earl grinned. I mean you're standing right where I want you. He dropped to the floor as 2 meters of electrical cable snapped taut at ankle height, tripping 3 of the warriors. While Torak burst from a hidden panel and grabbed 2 more, Earl was up and moving before the last warrior could aim, and he hit it with the fire extinguisher he had hidden behind his back. A solid blow to the neck joint where the shell was weakest. The fight lasted 9 seconds when it was over. 6 elite Velthury warriors lay on the ground, and Earl stood over them breathing hard. He took their weapons and distributed them to his people. And then he found the ship's intercom system. He pressed the button and spoke in his newly learned Velthury. His accent terrible, but his meaning clear. Y'all done messed up in her command center. Vrexel heard the message and closed her eyes. They had captured a human. They had not known he was American, and now they were going to pay for that mistake with everything they had. The battle for the silent grasp began in the lower decks and worked its way up like a fire climbing through dry wood. Or led from the front because that was the only way he knew how to lead. And behind him came an army of former slaves who had found something they thought they had lost forever. The will to fight Iraq. The Korath was Earl's right hand, all 4 of his arms carrying Velthury weapons. And the gray-scaled warrior fought with a fury that surprised even himself. I forgot what this felt like, Torak growled as they pushed through another corridor. To stand instead of kneel. Don't forget again. Earl Sadie left the Ilthrani stayed behind the fighters, her delicate hands working the ship systems from a stolen datapad. And her scholarly mind proved more dangerous than any weapon. The Velthury are sealing bulkheads ahead of us, she reported. But their security protocols are primitive. I can override them if you give me 30 seconds. You got 20, Earl said. Torak, hold this position. The Korath planted himself in the corridor like a mountain. And when 3 Velthury warriors rounded the corner, he met them with all 4 fists. They did not get past him. The fighting was brutal, deck by deck. And Earl lost people he had only known for hours, but had come to care about anyway. Young Fanari named Crix died taking a plasma bulb meant for Yeleth. And Earl carried the small body to a quiet corner and promised he would be remembered. A sylph warrior, whose name Earl never learned, drowned in her own blood after a Valkyrie blade found her gills. And her last act was to drag 2 enemies down with her. Each death made Earl fight harder. He had seen friends die before, in jungles and deserts and frozen mountains. And he knew the only way to honor them was to keep moving forward until the job was done. The Valkyrie could not understand what they were facing. They had conquered species that surrendered after a single battle. They had broken warrior cultures with a show of overwhelming force. And they had never encountered anything that kept. Fighting after defeat should have been certain, but humans were different. Humans had climbed down from trees and spread across a planet that was trying to kill. Then at every turn humans had invented fire and farming and medicine and spaceflight, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they refused to accept that anything was impossible. Humans were persistence, predators who had once hunted prey by simply following, until it died of exhaustion, and Earl McCaffrey was the most persistent human the galaxy had ever seen. "Why you keep fighting?" a wounded Valkyrie warrior asked as Earl stepped over its broken body. "Because I ain't dead yet," Earl said, "and until I am, I don't quit." They reached the bridge level after 6 hours of continuous combat. Earl's army had shrunk from 43 to 28, and everyone who remained carried wounds. But they had also grown stronger with every deck they claimed. The former slaves had learned to fight like humans, dirty and desperate, and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. Subarchon Rexel waited on the bridge with her remaining loyal warriors, and she had prepared for this moment. The doors sealed behind Earl when he entered, separating him from his army, and he found himself alone facing the Valkyrie commander and 8 armed soldiers. "This ends now, human," Rexel said, her translator rendering her clicks into cold English. "You have fought well, better than any creature I have encountered in 30 cycles of service. And so I offer you terms." Earl raised his rifle. "I'm listening. Surrender yourself, and your followers will be released. They will be given a vessel and allowed to return to their homeworlds. You have my word as Subarchon. And what happens to me? You will be studied, dissected probably. The Dominion must understand what makes humans so resistant to subjugation. Your sacrifice will spare your companions." Earl was quiet for a long moment, and Rexel felt a flutter of hope that perhaps this nightmare was finally ending. Then Earl laughed. "Ma'am, I'm from a country that started a war over taxes. You think I'm gonna negotiate with space bugs?" He moved before the words finished leaving his mouth. The Valkyrie had that half-second delay on their weapons, and Earl had been counting on it. And he crossed the distance to the nearest soldier before anyone could fire. He hit the soldier with his empty rifle like a club, then grabbed its weapon and shot the next one. The bridge erupted into chaos. Rexel shouted orders. Warriors scrambled for cover, and Earl moved through them like a force of nature, never stopping, never slowing, always attacking behind the sealed doors. Torak and the others heard the fighting and began working on overrides. And Yelath's fingers flew across her datapad with desperate speed. "Almost there," she said. "Hold on, Earl." Inside the bridge, Earl took a hit to the shoulder, a glancing blow that burned like fire. But he did not stop. He took another hit to the leg and kept moving, killed 4 soldiers and wounded 2 more before his rifle ran dry. And then he threw it at the nearest warrior's face and charged with his bare hands. Stark smashed through the doors just as Earl went down under the weight of 3 Valkyrie warriors. The Korath roared and tore into the enemy with all 4 arms. And behind him came the rest of the freed prisoners, screaming battle cries in a dozen languages. "Remember the Alamo," Yeleth shouted, having no idea what the words meant, but understanding they were important to Earl. The remaining Valkyrie fell in moments. Earl pushed himself up from the floor, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and he limped toward Rexel, who stood alone behind her command chair. "It's over." He saved. Rexel looked at the carnage around her, at the bodies of her warriors and the ragged army of slaves who had defeated them, and she slowly lowered her weapon. "You are monsters," she said quietly. "All of you, but especially you, human." "No, ma'am," Earl said. And he took the weapon from her hands and handed it to Torek. "We're just people who won't be slaves. There's a difference." He sat down in the captain's chair, his blood dripping onto the armrests, and he looked at the view screen showing the stars. "All right," he said to his army, to his friends, to the family he had forged in fire. "Let's go home." Yeleth worked the navigation systems, and Tarek secured the prisoners. And the small Fanari tended to Earl's wounds with gentle hands. They had taken the ship. They had won, and somewhere in the vastness of space, the Velthari Dominion was about to learn that humans were not to be underestimated, especially the American ones. The silent grasp dropped out of hyperspace above Earth on a Tuesday morning, and every defense agency on the planet immediately lost their minds. Radar stations lit up with warnings. Satellites detected the unknown vessel, and military commanders around the world prepared for what they assumed was an invasion. Then, the transmission came through on every open frequency. "This is Earl J. McCaffrey, United States Marine Corps, retired. I'm aboard an alien vessel approximately 50,000 miles from Earth. I have taken control of this ship with the help of some friends, and I would appreciate it if someone could come pick us up before I bleed out on this fancy chair." There was a long pause across every command center on the planet. Then Earl added, "Also, there's some aliens who were planning to invade. Y'all might want to know about that. I got one of their officers here who can explain everything." The next 12 hours were the most chaotic in human history. Space agencies that had been rivals for decades suddenly started cooperating. Military leaders who had never agreed on anything found themselves working together, and the United Nations held an emergency session that lasted until dawn. A hastily modified spacecraft launched from Cape Canaveral and docked with the silent grasp, and the first humans to board the alien vessel found Earl McCaffrey sitting in the captain's chair with his wounds wrapped in makeshift bandages and an alien rifle across his lap. "Took y'all long enough," he said. World changed overnight. News of extraterrestrial life spread across every network, and with it came the story of how a single American had been captured by an alien empire and had fought his way free. Earl refused most interviews, uncomfortable with the attention. But the footage from the ship's security systems was recovered and released to the public. People watched a middle-aged farmer from Texas take on an entire alien military operation with nothing but determination and improvised weapons. They watched him teach other enslaved species to fight. They watched him charge into impossible odds again and again, never stopping, never surrendering. "He's not special," a Marine Corps general told a news anchor. "Not in the way you mean. He's what we train our people to be. And there are millions more like him across this country." The other species who had fought with Earl were offered sanctuary on Earth, and most of them, except Tarak the Korath, settled in Montana, where his forearms made him extremely popular with local ranchers who needed help during calving season. Ilth, the Ilfrani, took a position at MIT, where her knowledge of alien technology advanced human science by decades. The Fanari founded a small community in Oregon, and their traditional crafts became highly sought after by collectors worldwide and everywhere they went. These alien refugees told the same story, the story of a human who refused to break, who taught them to fight when they had forgotten how, who gave them back their dignity, but nothing but his stubborn will. Sabarkam Rexel became an unlikely celebrity in her own right. She cooperated fully with Earth's governments, providing detailed information about the Velthari Dominion and its invasion plans. And she spent long hours in debriefing rooms, explaining how thoroughly her people had underestimated humanity. "We classified you as prey," she told a room full of military strategists. "We saw that you were soft, that you lacked natural weapons, that you died easily. We did not understand that these things made you dangerous rather than weak." "How so?" a general asked. "Because you evolved to overcome weakness," Rexel said. "You compensate for every limitation with tools and tactics and sheer stubbornness. You never stop adapting. You never accept defeat. And you have spent your entire existence fighting for survival against a planet that was trying to kill you." She paused and looked around the room at the humans listening to her. "We thought we were capturing cattle," she said. "We were actually capturing wolves who had learned to make fire." The Velthari Dominion's invasion plans were quietly shelved. High Command reviewed every piece of data from the silent grasp, the security footage, the mission reports, Rexel's extensive analysis, and they reached a conclusion that had never before been entered in their database. New entry was added to the Dominion species. Classification system HUMAN. Terran. Threat level. Extreme. Recommended response. Avoidance. Special note. Specimens from region designated America display heightened aggression, psychological resilience, and resistance to subjugation. Do not engage under any circumstances. Earth was removed from the list of candidate worlds for conquest. But humans, true to their nature, did not simply accept their safety and move on within 5 years. They had reverse-engineered the silent grasp and built their own fleet within 10 years. They had established colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, and within 20 years, the first human explorers ventured beyond their solar system, ready to meet whatever waited for them in the darkness between stars. They went with weapons, because they were human, and they had learned long ago that the universe was dangerous, but they also went with something else, a willingness to help, to protect, to fight for those who could not fight for themselves, because one American had shown the galaxy that humans would not stand by, while others suffered, and the galaxy would never forget it. Earl McCaffrey did not join the space program. He went back to his farm in Texas, where he raised cattle and mended fences, and sat on his porch every evening watching the stars. His friends visited often. Torak made the drive from Montana twice a year, and Yeleth called every Sunday to argue about physics. The young Fenari who had survived the rebellion came for holidays, and Earl taught them to fish in the creek behind his property. An alien rifle hung over his fireplace. Next to his old Marine Corps photograph, and an American flag flew from a pole in his front yards. Sometimes reporters came, looking for quotes or trying to get him to write a book, and Earl always turned them away. "I didn't do anything special," he told them every time. "I just didn't quit." One evening, a year after his return, Rexel appeared at his door. She had been granted asylum on Earth in exchange for her cooperation, and she had traveled halfway around the world to see the human who had destroyed her career. Earl opened the door and looked at her without surprise. "Took you long enough," he said. "Beer's in the fridge." They sat on his porch as the sun set, an old Marine and the alien commander he had defeated, and they watched the sky fill with stars. "I still do not understand you," Rexel said finally. "Not much to understand," Earl replied. "I'm just a man who don't like being told what to do. You risked everything. You suffered greatly. You could have died 100 times. And all for what? For freedom that you might never have lived to enjoy?" Earl was quiet for a long moment. "Let me tell you something," he said. "When I was in that cell of yours, I wasn't thinking about living. I was thinking about dying, right? About meeting my end on my feet instead of my knees. About showing whoever was watching that humans ain't built for chains." He took a sip of his beer. "Turns out I didn't have to die after all. But I would have, without hesitation, because some things are worth more than breathing. Rexel considered this. Your species is insane, she said at last. Earl grinned. That same dangerous grin that had terrified her on the bridge of her ship. Maybe so, he said. But we're the good kind of crazy. A news helicopter passed overhead, and Earl waved it off with a dismissive gesture. Damn reporters, he muttered. Worse than the bugs. Rexel made a sound that might have been offense or might have been laughter, and the stars shone down on a world that had changed forever. Because one stubborn American had refused to surrender. That was the story of Earl McCaffrey. That was the message Earth sent to the universe. Push us. And we push back, capture us, and we fight, try to break us. And we will break you instead, because that is what humans don't. We will never, ever stop.